I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
Presidential conventions are a staple of any election year.
When there are no ceilings, the sky's the limit.
But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, 2020's conventions are going to look different than any before. Political conventions are typically a 4-day meeting of party leaders and representatives.
Conventions are like a big family reunion. It's really about connecting with people to work together.
They usually feature committee meetings, performances, and speeches.
I was just your average hockey mom and signed up for the PTA. You know, they say the difference between a hockey mom and a pit bull? Lipstick.
There's nothing like being in a seat when Barack Obama walks out. Like, that is a moment.
But preventative measures to curb the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic means that most of this will be missing from 2020's conventions.
To have a big convention is not the right time.
There's nothing that's going to replace the feeling of being in that big arena, because that is our energy. You know, it's what gets us motivated. I think that there's energy that comes from everyday people getting to watch that. I think that's going to be hard, very, very difficult to replicate.
The Democratic National Convention will be moving mostly online, with meetings, voting, and speeches happening remotely. The Republican National Convention will still probably meet in some capacity, but most public events have been canceled. This is the first time in convention history that candidates and most delegates will not be meeting in person.
I think it'll also be hard because you're just sitting there in front of your screen for a long time. Are people going to be engaged about staying there and sitting tight?
Even though the conventions will look different and present some new challenges for parties, the way they operate and their core purpose won't really change. Presidential conventions started in the 1800s to replace a caucus system that was used to nominate candidates.
The idea originally was to get partisans together in a central location to then, do all the things that we associate with real politics. They emerged as important institutions because the American party system was and is remarkably decentralized. And so the idea of having a national convention is to kind of bring it all together.
Officially, the purposes of conventions are unifying a party, nominating a candidate, and solidifying a platform. In practice, they're also a lot about showmanship.
I've got Mr. Obama sitting here. What do you mean, shut up? Okay.
Candidates usually see a bump in polls right after conventions.
The fall campaign starts right after Labor Day. And it goes through Election Day. So it's not for nothing that the conventions now are happening in August, right? So that's meant to serve as a springboard to that larger fall campaign.
The main attendees of conventions are delegates. Delegates vote for the presidential nominee and the platform, as well as help craft their party's values for the current election cycle.
The delegates are the worker bees of the state. They represent a lot of constituencies. They bring with them tens of thousands of people sometimes.
Delegates are elected to represent choices that voters make in primaries and caucuses across the country.
And that's where the delegate work, where you can say, look, I'm representing people who are going through this every day, and I'm going to be somebody who's going to advocate for that.
When you vote in a primary, your vote helps decide how many delegates are awarded to a particular candidate. Think of the delegate system a little bit like a baseball game. A hit is like a vote, but the number of runs, or delegates, is what wins the game. The more votes you get, the better chance you have at getting a higher number of delegates. Democratic conventions also have superdelegates, who are party leaders and committee members, and aren't pledged to a certain candidate. Their votes factor in differently based on the rules set for the current election cycle. Each state formally announces the number of delegates they are pledging to a certain candidate during the roll call at the convention.
Our delegation is duly bound to cast 10 votes for Senator Rubio and 9 votes for Governor Kasich.
Candidates need to receive a majority of delegates in order to clinch the nomination. Since most delegates are awarded right after primaries, it's usually already known who the presumptive candidate will be going into the convention.
Political conventions for decades now have really just been there to affirm the choices that primary voters and caucus attenders made months earlier.
What's also become a vital part of conventions for each party is presenting a united front to voters. This is done through rallies, speakers, and performances.
People remember those moments, and that's where we start to cue into what the future leadership of our party looks like.
In 2004, a little-known senator from Illinois had an opportunity to speak at the Democratic convention. That little-known senator was Barack Obama.
It is that fundamental belief, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, that makes this country work.
These appearances lead up to the main event, which is the candidate's acceptance of the nomination on the final night.
Thank you. I humbly and gratefully accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
2020's changes have prompted many to take a closer look at conventions and question whether or not they're really still essential to the electoral process.
I can tell you that 2012, which we knew where our nominee was going to be, was just as useful to me as one where we don't, because of all the other things that tend to happen. And having those leaders and those folks who are doing the work on the ground have a voice and be in a format like this is so essential. And like I said, this is where you make connections. This is where you get inspired.
I see some value in having an event that is clearly a big ticket event where there's a lot of limelight. If you took the conventions out, I'm not sure, we'd have another moment like that.
Delegates, this convention is adjourned.